Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, January 17th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we dig into some late winter. I want to say spring. Late winter. It's still winter. I look out my window, and it doesn't look like winter. The winters I'm used to, the winters I've had most of my life, look very different.
It's not all white out there.
Not white. There's been plenty of rain, unfortunately, like too much. But the sunshine, it's nice.
The thing that killed me when I lived in New York was that March was like, I considered March a spring month, and spring training had started. Mm-hmm. And I'd always be like writing about baseball or thinking about baseball or looking or drafting, my leagues and stuff, and be outside in New York being like, this ain't spring.
There are so many times I can remember getting a dog kind of changed this. When we got Hazel, I remember walking around my neighborhood in late February, kind of beginning part of March when spring training games begin, listening to Brewers games while taking her for a walk. And I'm walking around and there's like snow banks next to the sidewalk, maybe even ice on the sidewalk, depending on the year. And you're listening to Bob Uecker. And it's warm and sunny and great in Arizona.
It's infuriating.
You're trying not to fall on the sidewalk from the ice and snow. It's like, this is weird. Like, it's giving me hope that this is about to end. That this
but it also makes it worse in the moment somehow.
Yeah, it's like, but I'm not at the ballpark right now. So
yeah.
This is a little bit jarring.
Cursing all the people who went to spring training.
Yeah. So it's the later stage moves. Some of these we've discussed on other shows, the 3-0 show most specifically, but a lot of different things that could actually have significant fantasy impact in the year ahead. So we begin today. Frankie Montas has a shoulder injury, and it was John Heyman, I believe, who had the tweet suggesting that Montas will likely miss the first month of the season. They're calling it shoulder inflammation. Montas had a shoulder issue in 2022, so I think this adds a little bit of extra concern, just given this isn't the first brush with the shoulder problems, and he didn't pitch particularly well during his time with the Yankees either. So what should we make of Montas himself? And then as we look at this Yankees depth chart behind him, who do you think emerges to possibly pick up a starting role in the early part of the season with Montas likely on the shelf?
I think this is becoming a problem when it comes to just the course of his career, the shape of his career. He has not really had much bulk in his life. I mean, he's once had 187 innings in 2021, 144 last year. Before that, he didn't have 100 once. So it's not, he's not a guy who's he's made 30 starts once in his career. I guess 27 and 32. You could say the last 2 years were decent, but I had to really pump him down in the rankings, and I don't know if I've done enough. Right now, I have him 74th. My rankings come out this week. I've got him 73rd or 74th. Look at 73rd, right ahead of Kenta and Maeda. Decent injury concerns. Montas projects way better. Has good stuff plus and even good location plus, but with a month off, that means you're babying him on your roster for a month. And, I frankly, I don't know if I should push him behind the next group of pitchers, which is all my favorite young pitchers. Would you rather have, a month where Michael Kopech is on your roster and you're deciding if he's good or not, and you're reaping that upside and you're getting more information, or a month with Frankie Montas on your roster, just reading every little snippet of how he feels and when he's going to throw and when he's going to get on the mound and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. I think maybe he belongs later even. Maybe he belongs down with Corey Kluber and Sonny Gray in the 90s.
Yeah, I like Gray the most of that bunch, and maybe I like Gray a little more than most. But I think because of how much he struggled after the trade, Montas is not a pitcher I would wait for in a league without IL spots, right? We think about this in terms of like the NFBC formats where you've got either 12 to 15 teams, you got a 7-man bench, no IL. You usually can have one player who's not doing anything stashed away. If you have more than that, you start to run into some trouble. You start to end up with either bad pitchers in your lineup, or you're turning the roster more than you want to, or you're not getting enough playing time from your hitters, shuffling hitters in and out on Mondays and Fridays because your bench is smaller than it should be with that injured player you're carrying. So I think of that spot as extremely valuable if I'm going to stash someone, be that an injured player or a prospect. They have to be a high probability to pay off.
And probably not even worth it, man. Honestly, like just think of how often things go foobar on your fantasy teams. Where you're just like, what? That guy got hurt, and that guy got hurt, and that guy got hurt. To have a place where you're like, no, I'm holding this guy. He's already hurt. You're going to draft someone who's already hurt?
Right. And I think this is different than someone coming back from an injury, too. There's going to be what about this guy that had surgery? Well, he had surgery in November and he recovered from it in December and was working out by January.
Readings and
yeah, and he was throwing on day one of camp like everybody else. That's different to me than someone who's actively hurt and will be behind schedule. So that's part of where I draw the line too.
I think this is good news for Domingo Germán, probably. I would just, that's where Fangraphs has as the sixth guy. The only, it's good news for Domingo Germán. I like Clark Schmidt, and I like his arsenal a little better as a starting pitcher. It's wider. It's really interesting, and I think he has more upside as a starting pitcher. And I think Germán could be a really good reliever because I think he'd push that velo up to 94, 95, 96 even. And then he has like a mid-80s curveball as a reliever. I think that would really work. And some of his command issues would become a little bit lesser. So, when I look at his pitches, Germán, it's really in that kind of that area where people are, I was just reading a great piece by Rustin Dodd, and I know he collaborated with somebody. Was it Stephen Nesbitt? But the one about the baseball prospectus, the creating baseball prospectus, and Gary Huckabee and the alt Usenet board that they used to play. Did you read that one? That was good.
I did not. I saw it go up. I didn't read it yet.
But there was one little note in there where they hired James Click, and they're to be an intern at Baseball Perspective early on, Baseball Prospectus. And there's this one little note that says they disagreed. James Click thought you could be a starting pitcher with 2 pitches, and Gary Huckabee thought you needed 3. And it was just like a throwaway line, just a part of trying to give you an idea of like the kind of discussions they were having. And when I look at Domingo Germán, I think he's kind of in like possibly in that group, just because I know he does throw 4 pitches by StatCast, but and the changeup is okay. It's about league average, but I think he would be so much more effective if he did not throw the sinker ever, and he was just a 4-seam curveball guy. And so I wonder if he does that even as a starting pitcher, if that's relevant to is he a starting pitcher or is he not? But for now, he's a starting pitcher. He's the next guy in line. He's going to be the guy who's going to get the ball, because I think Clark Schmidt can still kind of be an up and down guy for another year.
Yeah. And the way they use Schmidt at the big league level, 26 relief appearances, 3 starts in 2022. All 8 of his appearances at AAA last year were starts. Kind of makes you think they're going to make him the next guy up if they need another person. They've used Germán more in that kind of fill-in role in the past. I kind of get it. I think
am more excited about it.
If Schmidt gets the
chance.
Fangraphs
is right. Schmidt has another option. That's relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, we've talked about this before too. Schmidt is older than you'd think.
Mm-hmm.
Schmidt is already 26, turns 27 in February.
But young pitchers don't exist anymore. Young starting pitchers, it's really, really rare. Everyone takes a while to figure out the injury portion of it, to figure out the whole arsenal bit of it. The young pitcher, the sort of the 22-year-old starting pitcher in the big leagues just didn't really exist.
No, increasingly rare. So yeah, it sounds like you're throwing the dart at Germán. I'm actually probably just avoiding the Yankees depth starters in most situations. Yeah, I think I'm out on Germán. I'm just
the park and
the K rate's a little low. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I just think there are enough talented guys in that organization that project better than him. It doesn't take as much for him to lose his job as you'd think, even though the who takes his job isn't as clear as it is in other instances.
So
So I don't know.
Well, Stuff Plus loves Clark Schmidt and does not love Domingo Germán. 98 Stuff Plus. Clark Schmidt 109.7 Stuff Plus. A little bit of that's relief, helps him. But I have Germán 118th and Clark Schmidt 120th.
Yeah, see? They're already
so I guess I'm agreeing with you. Why would I spend on Germán if I have Schmidt that close, right?
Yeah. Let's go to another signing. Trey Mancini lands with the Cubs. I think we both kind of said, well, Eric Hosmer going to the Cubs doesn't impact Matt Mervis all that much. Trey Mancini going there, I think, that's a clear, like, this guy's going to play. But this is kind of the thing that I hinted at when we talked about Hosmer, was that if there's a dip on Mervis, I'm in. Because when he's trendy and moving up the board, it becomes, a little harder to justify what it costs on draft day. If this scares people away from Mervis, I think it's the perfect time to start drafting Matt Mervis, because Eric Hosmer is a min salary player for the Cubs. They have no obligation to play him the way that the Padres did during his time in San Diego.
Yes, combined over the last 5 years been basically worth 0 wins.
Right. So if Mervis mashes this spring, why wouldn't you just play Mancini and Mervis as your first base DH?
And there's also a larger point of how prospects are valued, and where Corbin Carroll is going versus Matt Mervis, right? It's like we treat Corbin Carroll as if there's no risk, and I don't know if that's completely true, but you can put a different name in for Carroll if you like. But we treat these sort of top end guys as if there's no risk, the Bobby Witts in their first year, and we draft them, at very, very high, and then we leave these other guys who have clear opportunity. We kind of leave them for the later rounds. And I'm much more interested in a guy like Mervis, who I can see has the opportunity because the price is so much lower. Especially now, I feel like I could take Mervis in a draft and hold as my third first baseman. And that I feel like he'd be superior to most prospects in a draft and hold format, because you could hold a prospect all year in a draft and hold format and he wouldn't give you any plate appearances. But Matt Mervis will give you plate appearances this year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how Mervis got to AAA last year, kind of split. Well, he had 3 levels last year, but almost equal amounts of time at AA and AAA after a great start at high A. The K rate went down as he advanced. I don't know if we can look at a 14.6% K rate in 57 games at AAA and say he's better at making contact than he was at every other stop. I don't think that's necessarily the sign that a skill has been unlocked, but it's an encouraging step in the right direction. They could send him down if they wanted to for a few weeks and just kind of see like how real was what you were doing at the end of last season. But the Cubs are in that spot right now. They've done enough to this roster to be competitive where the best guys are going to play. And if Mervis is clearly better than Eric Hosmer, he will play. Like, I don't have any doubt about that. I'm surprised looking at the projections that Eric Hosmer is still projected to be a league average bat. The Bat X has Hosmer at 261, 325, 380. WRC plus of an even 100.
One thing I'd like to point out, though, is that league average with the bat at first base is not league average.
Right. You want more than that, because
the league last year at first base was 7% better than league average. Yeah, so he's below average, even though he's projected to be average.
And Mervis's projection is a little under that. Average is lower, 235, 295, 393. So you're giving up OBP by projection. But projections for young players, as we know, can be pretty volatile. I think I would
look
take
at his steamer one. His steamer one says he's going to be 20% better than league average. So.
Right. So if you're looking at that information, you're saying, what's the most likely outcome in terms of playing time between Hosmer and Mervis? I think it's still Mervis, even though Mancini takes one of the 2 spots that, Mervis is capable playing.
I think the Bat X is very reasonable with young players. So I don't want to say that it's completely the floor, but it is sort of valuable to have the Bat X and the Steamer next to each other to kind of describe floor and ceiling a little bit. I mean, the Bat X 235, 295, 393 for Mervis, steamer 258, 319, 473 for Mervis, 473 slugging. That's the kind of thing that if you projected out for full season would get close to 30 homers.
Mm-hmm.
And with a decent batting average. So you're talking a really, really good late round pick. So that's, but you have to pay for the Bat X, right? Like you have to buy him when the Bat X says you should buy him and hope you get the steamer. That's how I sort of see young players. And that means I'm probably not going to get Corbin Carroll, but I might get Matt Mervis.
I could live with that if that's how it all plays out, because the players that go around Carroll have longer track records. The players that go around Matt Mervis don't, and they have just as many questions about playing time and skills in many cases. Mancini himself, what kind of season are you expecting from him making the move into Wrigley as his home park? Really consistent barrel rates throughout his career, really consistent O-swing percentages, just kind of a solid player across the board that I think gives them some depth in this lineup, some much needed depth.
Yeah, I hit a real hard time in Houston, and I wonder if it's just because you think about his backstory. Here's a guy that was drafted by the Orioles, in the 8th round, and then sort of rocketed up and became, I don't know if he's a star necessarily, but became an above average regular with the Orioles. Then had the cancer and came back with them. Good story all around. Houston was the first time he was really sort of pushed out of his comfort zone as a player, where he's traded to a new team, trying to make a good impression at a really important time. And so, yeah, I would just look away from those Houston numbers and instead look at the Baltimore numbers, where he was 16% better than league average, hit 268, hit 10 homers, would have hit, it would have hit about 18, I think, if he'd stayed in Baltimore as it got warmer. But just a better batting average. So I think he's in line for a better batting average than he put up last year. I think he can hit as high as 260 as long as he's comfortable with the Cubs. And, it's a 2-year deal, right? And he's going to have all spring to get to know them. And, 260 with 18 homers, it's okay. It's for the Cubs, it's a above average DH, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And for fantasy players, it's a good late pick at a position that is not super easy late. I think he'll play, and that's really important.
Yeah, a viable corner option if you spent up on everything else. I think that's the way I would describe Trey Mancini at this point. Probably won't hurt you, could actually help you a bit, and end up being a top 150 player that goes pretty consistently outside the top 200. Interesting to sort of compare him to Brandon Belt. I think Brandon Belt, because of his knees, brings a much greater health question to the equation. And I wonder, for Brandon Belt, getting out of Oracle Park, going to Toronto, what do you see for the role? Like, do you see kind of a Jock Peterson playing time cap on Belt, just as a guy that's probably more big sign platoon masher? I mean, it could be really good on a per plate appearance basis, but it could be maybe a little frustrating to manage in weekly formats, depending on how the pieces fit around him on this depth chart.
Yeah, for his career, Belt has been above average against lefties, but if you kind of look at the aging curve on that, he's only been above average versus lefties once in the last 6 seasons. And I don't normally look at season-to-season splits like this, but I just wanted to check, because the way I would use Brandon Belt, and we said this on the 3-0 show, is I would use him strictly against righties. I'd probably sub him out of games when a lefty comes on, and I think for 2 reasons. A, he's only been above average once in the last 6 seasons against lefties. And B, it can count as load management and just keep him off his knees. I know he said in the press conference that his knees feel great and he's ready to go. But around San Francisco, there's always been the feeling that the next knee injury is the last one. And so I think just being conscientious with his playing time is going to be important. It's not a team that needs him to play every day. They'd rather have that lefty come off the bench and hit for power. So I think the projections have it about right. 360 to 420 plate appearances, going to be a tough one in weekly leagues. I think he's going to be a guy in NFBC that gets streamed a lot. When people see, oh, this weekend it's all righties, they're at home, they're in Yankee Stadium, whatever it is. There'll be a guy who gets picked up and dropped a lot. So not someone I necessarily want to run out and draft. In a draft and hold, that actually you're trying to bake in a lot of the streaming that you would do with hitters. So decent, like I think an okay, would you say a second first baseman? No, probably a third first baseman.
Maybe the same tier as Mancini in draft and hold, but I do think format is really important here. I think in a league where you've got
dailies, you want daily probably.
In a 12-team league, I think he will be one of the most added and drop players in the pool because there will be plenty of weeks where people will want him, but there's going to be plenty of weeks where you can't afford to keep him. So yeah, he'll be on 4 or 5 different rosters in a 12-team league this year. So just know that going in. Not necessarily a player you have to draft, but a player that might help you in some of those more shallow leagues. And a daily moves league just depends on how deep your bench is. You know, to hold a player like this in a daily moves league, a lot of those leagues only have 5 guys on the bench.
Yeah,
he's probably not good enough to do that either. He'd be on the roster, off the roster, like a spot that you're actually churning rather than stashing.
Slightly more valuable in like OBP leagues. It's probably going to be a strong OBP. I know he's only projected for sort of 320, 330, but he had 370, 430 the year before. So, like, you know, this is an OBP guy.
So I thought this would have a negative effect on the playing time of Alejandro Kirk and or Danny Jansen, because if you're allocating big side platoon plate appearances to Brandon Belt at DH, one of the catchers has to sit. Which one do you think loses the most playing time?
I was really surprised by how good Danny Jansen's numbers last year. 140 WRC plus, 256 ISO. I was really surprised by all this. And I don't really have, this is like kind of a gut feel thing. But I guess one way I can attack it with numbers is he had okay barrel rates before, 8%, 8.5%. Last year he had a 13% barrel rate. People are going to see that and say, oh, he deserved the power that he had. He's growing into his power. He's 27. This is his real power level. I'm going to say what you normally need to do is regress those barrel rates. So I think he's likely to put up like a 9% barrel rate next year. If he does that, I don't see him having a 256 ISO. I see him having like sort of a 180 ISO, something like he did in 2020. If he has a 180 ISO and the strikeout rates go back up again, he's going to be a good but not great offensive catcher. And then he's going to be in the same place as Alejandro Kirk. So I don't know why Alejandro Kirk's slated for fewer plate appearances than Danny Jansen. There are still DH versus left-handers. So maybe Danny Jansen will DH against left-handers, but Kirk is a righty too, right?
Yeah, both catchers are righties. So, one's automatically in when a lefty starts anyway. So they'll both play against lefties, but one has to sit when they face righties when Belt's healthy.
And I think I'd rather, like, at least offensively, I think next year I'd rather have Kirk in there.
Yeah, I think the way they use Kirk in the heart of the order too gives you a pretty good indicator that they trust him. They like his bat. They really
where do they play Jansen?
Jansen hits a little lower, but I think I've seen Kirk hit cleanup on that team.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kirk is going the other direction where he had 11% barrel rate in 21 and a 7% barrel rate last year. He still makes elite contact, way better than Jansen. And if he regresses in the other direction and has a 9% barrel rate, he's going to be a better hitter because he's going to walk more and he's going to strike out less. So, defensively, I defer to people who watch, sort of day to day. I know that Kirk did not have a great reputation defensively coming up. I don't necessarily see it in the numbers. But like he was a great framer last year and better than Jansen. So I kind of think Kirk should get more playing time than Jansen. That's the argument I'm making. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'll have Kirk ahead of Jansen in my rankings pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I'm going to have Kirk ahead too. I think this hurts Jansen more. I think they are likely to see Jansen the way you described him, as someone that almost certainly is going to give back some barrel rate, even though he's made a lot of strides with his plate skills. An excellent number 2 catcher to have. The way this roster fits together is very good for the Blue Jays. It's just a little frustrating for fantasy managers who were expecting Danny Jansen to be maybe a really good catcher 2, or even a low-end catcher 1.
Yeah, or Kirk. I mean, whichever one you were betting on, they both sort of fall out of that tier. I was looking in my most recent, my first draft and hold that I was doing. I was looking at a collection of catchers that I thought, well, if I get one of these guys, I'll be all right. And I'm saying behind Real Muto and Varsho, there's kind of the Rutschman, Kirk, Sean Murphy, Wilson Contreras, grouping. And I thought that they were a little bit clear of the young guys, William Contreras and Cal Raleigh, and MJ Melendez, and Tyler Stevenson coming off of an injury. So I wanted to shop in that group. This pushed Kirk out of that group a little bit. So that group gets a little bit smaller. Now you're talking about Murphy, Contreras, and Rutschman as a little mini tier there, I think. And that's why I ended up with Murphy in the 8th round because it's a 2-catcher league, and I didn't want my number 1 catcher to be a totally untested young guy or an old guy coming off an injury. He's not old, Tyler Stevenson, but you know what I mean, like a veteran coming off an injury.
Yeah, I think I still see Murphy and Kirk as top 10 catchers, even though they have some playing time questions because of the quality of depth behind them. In Murphy's case, it's Travis d'Arnaud. Kirk's case, it's Danny Jansen. I think I have Murphy ahead of Kirk now because the DH spot is more spoken for in Toronto. More of those plate appearances are clearly claimed, whereas in Atlanta, I think it's a little more up for grabs, where you could see the 2 catchers working in tandem a little bit more often. But that could change based on a number of things we'll probably talk about at some point in the near future. Let's go to a trade that went down. I didn't really see this one coming at all. The Dodgers added Miguel Rojas to their infield mix. I think it was Jacob Amaya that went the other way to the Marlins in this trade. What do you make of the depth chart the Dodgers currently have around the infield? Do you think this is just another versatile player that allows them to move other guys around too? Like, how does this work for the Dodgers?
I've seen some people selling and cutting Gavin Lux in auto new leagues and selling Gavin Lux and declaring Miguel Rojas the starting shortstop. I don't know if I go that far. My read on this is Miguel Rojas could have just come in to be a utility guy as much as anything else. Lux is projected to be better with the bat. I guess Rojas protects them defensively. So they'll have a good defensive shortstop on this team no matter what. But the backup shortstop, if it's Rojas is the starting shortstop, the backup shortstop is Gavin Lux. He's the guy with the bat. So if they need offense late in the game, they're going to bring Gavin Lux in, even if he hasn't started that game. And at second base, Gavin Lux is the starter if Rojas is the starter at short, because they need help in the outfield, and Chris Taylor's probably going to play more outfield than infield.
Yep.
So, yes, Max Muncy does mess things up, but I think Max Muncy doesn't profile as a defensive second baseman in the post-shift rules changes. I think Max Muncy should not play much second base this year defensively. So I think Lux his playing time is fairly safe, as safe as any Dodgers can be. I mean, they definitely muck around with the depth chart. But I think Lux is safe, and I think Rojas is not very interesting for fantasy. I think even in deep leagues, I think there's some playing time risk that I just outlined. And if there's playing time risk, why are you going to go heavy in on a guy who's projected to be a 256 homer, 7 steal guy?
Fair question.
And not even heavy in. Why would you like? There's probably other $2 or $3 players you could get on the middle infield that might play more.
I think the first part of what you said, Rojas is a backup. I think that's clear. I'm not worried about him.
You think that's clear?
I think he's a backup. I think he's a super utility backup. Like he's a great glue guy, because
that's interesting. I think people read this as he was their starting shortstop. I
They
don't see
don't
it.
they don't need offense from every spot. We talk about this with great teams all the time. So they can afford a guy that is league average at best, and that's really stretching it in his best seasons. And I'm not going to count the 2020 40 games where he was really good, because it was 40 games.
But center field's an issue for them too. So
and you can't have two holes up the middle. You can't. You can't have two, like on the depth chart, where if like one guy that can play both spots gets hurt, you have nobody. You can't have that. That doesn't work. So I think they've solved that in a very simple way, where they didn't get a long-term replacement. This gives them a lot of positional flexibility. What I'm struggling with was the addition of JD Martinez, because I think with Max Muncy especially, and some of his defensive limitations, you pretty much have to play Muncy at third. If you're gonna play Rojas, Muncy has to play third, unless you're going to play JD Martinez in the outfield, because assuming you're playing Lux at second, right? So this is just a weird depth chart right now. I think Miguel Vargas is one of those guys. If he's hitting, he's going to play. If Vargas is hitting, is he playing third? And then you're pushing. Where are you putting Muncy then? If Vargas hits, does Muncy have to play second, and then Lux plays short and Rojas goes to the bench?
Lux? You tried Lux in center?
They've dabbled with that. You put Taylor out there and play one of these guys in left. Yeah,
Vargas in left.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Also,
did JD out there?
Muncy never got surgery on the elbow, like not Tommy John surgery, right? He just sort of rest and rehabbed it.
Ended up playing. Yeah, he never actually had it. They were afraid he would need Tommy John,
which means to me that it's partially torn, right?
Which he could still need Tommy John. Like, look at the season he just had.
And then now you're going to put Muncy at third, where he has to air it out.
Right.
I mean, this is an interesting depth chart. I don't. They always make an emphasis on having redundancy, right? And this feels like one of the least redundant outfields, or one of the least redundant depth charts they've had in a while.
Fair.
With awkward fits all over the place. How do you look at this and profit? How do you look at this depth chart and make a bet? I would say, given the way they acted, they think of this year as maybe a little bit of reset. And so I would bet on the young players on this team. Why bet on Trace Thompson if he's already 31 years old?
Yeah, he's projected for a 36% K rate. So as nice of a story as that was last year, I'm not betting on Trace Thompson for 2023.
Chris Taylor showed up as a guy who swings at strikes and doesn't swing at balls, and like has some carrying plate discipline type stuff, but he's obviously on the decline as well. And even though he'll play, I don't know that if I'm going to make a bet on anybody on this roster at their ADP, there's a little bit. This might be surprising to some, because I've spoken the trash about Gavin Lux in the past. But Gavin Lux and Miguel Vargas are in some ways. Mookie Betts, like, sort of perennially being an early second round pick doesn't make any sense to me. So I like Mookie, but Gavin Lux and Miguel Vargas might be people to bet on this year, just because this looks like a bit of a reset year. And what do they want to do coming out of a reset year? Have a brand new starting player that's young and cheap, right? I think they would love to come out of this year, even if they don't do as well as they wanted to, wins and losses or in the division or whatever it is. I think they would love to be like, aha, but we do now have a young core of Will Smith, Miguel Vargas, and Gavin Lux, which is Dodgers 2.0. And we're going to build around those guys.
Well, yeah, and everyone's already saying Shohei Ohtani is a Dodger in 2024. So, you've got that coming. But this is still a really good team, even if it's not quite as good as it was last year. I think Vargas, by projection, really pops, too, for a young player. 17% better than league average by the Bat X, low K rate.
Which is amazing, because it's usually the one that's like really, not into the young guys.
Yeah, Vargas already projects more favorably than Taylor and Lux, and I think Taylor and Lux have to play a lot. So when you start to look at that, you're like, well, Vargas is going to play a lot too. He's going to be one of the winners. I think I think you're right about Lux. I think there were enough small steps forward where they're still going to see what they have in him. This is kind of the last of the prove it years for him, at least in Los Angeles, to be an everyday guy. If it doesn't happen this year, that's probably it for him as a guy that we expect to be a regular on this team at least. And maybe he's included in a midseason trade if it's not working out. I think Muncy is the true wild card from a health perspective. If we get typical Max Muncy, that changes a lot about how we view the pieces on this depth chart, and how
it does make it bad for Lux and Vargas if he's good.
Somewhat, yeah, just because of some of the defensive limitations of how the pieces are coming together right now. As far as the player going back to Miami, Jacob Amaya, any interest in him from like a keeper dynasty perspective?
Oh, it's just interesting to. I think you think about how excited people get about certain players and just the hype, the up and down life of a prospect and the hype associated with that. I remember Jacob Amaya being a well sought after player at one point this last season. He was in the midst of a stretch of AA where he was 20% better than league average, had a good strikeout rate and a 236 ISO. And you're like, oh, this is a young man growing into his power. This is a guy who's always made contact and had a good plate approach. What if he adds power? This could be a real breakout. And, I think that Amaya had an amazing amount of prospect cash in dynasty leagues. And you could have traded him there are probably people listening to this that traded Jacob Amaya for something really nice last year. And then it all sort of went away in 351 plate appearances in AAA after he got promoted. The strikeout rate went up. The ISO disappeared. He was 6% worse than league average. And now you're starting to look, oh, he's 24 and he really only has one stop where he had power. This reminds me a lot of them picking up Jordan Groshans from the Blue Jays, where they're saying, doesn't look good now. It's only looked good once. But what if it looks good like that again? Then we win. And they didn't give up much to get Groshans or Jacob Amaya. Maybe one of these guys turns it around. I don't have that much hope for it, but at least they make contact. They have good plate approaches. If they add any more power, you remember those names, Groshans and Amaya. One of those guys might turn out to be something.
Yeah, he's, probably going to bounce around a little bit, play multiple spots. I think it's interesting. I'm looking at the Eric Longenhagen write-up, and Amaya was the best defensive infielder on the Dodgers 40-man when he wrote up their last prospect report.
I'm a little surprised that the Dodgers just didn't put Amaya in that spot.
Well, yeah, they had their reasons, so we shall see how that plays out. I think Amaya is mostly a draft and hold and NL only player for me as we look at 2023.
Dynasty.
Yeah,
dynasty,
deep dynasty.
It has to be a
20-team dynasty.
Yeah, and otherwise, but I am a little surprised because he projects to be 10 to 15% worse than league average with the bat. Jacob Amaya does, and Miguel Rojas, whose projections are maybe more reliable. Maybe that's the whole thing of it. Is projected to be 7 to 10% worse than league average. So do they just really get a lot out of that? A couple points of slugging.
Confidence in the glove, and also just that the guy can hold his own against big league pitching. Whereas Amaya, if he's struggling, you're taking not just like a slightly below average performance, you're taking a way below average, like an unacceptable level.
But you don't even want to play out there, yeah.
Right. Like think Christian Pache, where you're like, oh, the defense is great, so it'll work out. And you're like, no, this is so bad offensively, we can't actually do anything with it. Speaking of the A's added another free agent. Shintaro Fujinami is headed to Oakland, and they've actually made a pretty high volume of moves. None of them prior to this one were overwhelmingly exciting because the Sean Murphy trade netted them a player that you and I are very unsure of, and Esteury Ruiz being the main big league piece, but they did Kyle Muller in that trade. Muller could be in this rotation. They've got competition. They got Freddie Tarnock in that trade too. They got a deep group of pitchers, and it's kind of hard to figure out who they're going to go to first. Fujinami, I would assume, enters with a rotation spot to call his own, but what did you see in your opportunities to dig in a little bit on Fujinami?
He He averaged 4 1/3 innings per appearance last year. And I'm looking at Baseball Reference, and I don't see games versus games started right now. But I do know that he's been sort of between a reliever and a starter in his recent history. He is a guy who came up and was throwing over 100 miles an hour in Japan. He was a rookie, 19-year-old rookie out of high school that had a 2.75 ERA in his first year with tons of strikeouts. And he had an interesting career where for a while he was a stud, throwing really, really hard, has a really great splitter, pretty good breaking ball, no command. And the no command bit started to bite him in the butt. And in 2021, he had a 6 walks per 9 in the limited major league appearances, but he had 4.6 walks per 9 in 2020, 5.7 walks per 9 in 2017. I saw a video that was pointing to some early 160, 170 pitch outings that may have led to some of the injury concerns, but also the wildness suggests that maybe he didn't have very repeatable mechanics. Anyway, Shintaro Fujinami ended up wild and injured for a good part of the middle of his career. Last year was the first year where he kind of he got past 100 innings again. The walk rate was manageable. He was still throwing 96s out there, had a 2.77 ERA. So what the A's are doing is betting on, it's almost like the Rich Hill thing where they've seen a small sample of good from somebody that's been out of the game for a while or has been up and down and just bet on it. And the Rich Hill bet worked. This one could work, but people I talked to around the national, the NPB is Nippon Professional Baseball, the Japanese league, sort of think that he would be better cast as a reliever at this point. And he would be really exciting as a reliever because he'd be a 98, 99 mile an hour guy with a killer splitter. And he could end up being the closer for the A's. Because of that, I do like Trevor May, but because he could be a closer or one of their starters, and I don't think he's going to come over with options. I do like him as a pick. I'm not sure it's going to work out as a starter. So I'd be a little worried that the helium caused by his locale where he's pitching and the seeming opportunity in the rotation is going to outstrip how likely I think he is to be a great starter in the big leagues this year.
All right, so you're in a draft and hold right now. I'm going to guess after round 30, sometime in that range is when you'd start to think about him if he's still out there, just based on the way you're describing him. And it sounds like it's more of a late dart where you're hoping to get some saves as opposed to a late dart where you're expecting to end up with someone that you viably throw in as a starter.
Yeah, I have him sort of comfortably behind the arms that the young arms I'm really excited about, like Luis Ortiz, Ken Waldachuk, Hayden Wesneski. Those guys are in the 80s. Right now, I have Shintaro Fujinami 92nd, which is still actually a little bit higher than where you're putting him. But he may drop a little bit. I'm working on the ranks today. And he could be somewhere in the low 100s. Tyler McGill is a guy who has great stuff, but no opportunity. He's at 101 right now. So yeah, somewhere in the late 90s, early 100s. So maybe a little bit earlier than what you're saying, but the 100th pitcher, when does the 100th pitcher go by ADP?
When would that be?
And that's 100 starting pitchers. So that's a little bit more annoying, but
so let's assume that of at least 30 relievers probably go. So you got to go down to like pitcher 130.
Yeah, pitcher 130 by ADP.
Pick 400, sometime around there.
And pick 400 is the 29th round. Okay. 28th round. So yeah, okay. Yeah, we're talking the same language. Yeah. just wanted to get it right. Late 20s. I'm into it. One thing I like about it, though, as much as I'm a little bit pessimistic, one thing I like about it is there's two ways you could be right.
Yep.
You could
That's
be
the
the
beauty.
closer, or you could be a starter, right? So
It's,
the more ways you can be right is good.
I find that taking the chance on that is usually it's going to happen on a team that's not good, because if you're not good enough to start on a team that has playoff aspirations, you're not necessarily front of the line in the bullpen, because they probably have a decent bullpen already.
You're
With
like
the
the
A's,
middle
there are
guy.
so many questions. Like, no, he could be our third best starter, or he could be our number one reliever. Which
I do like May. He had this thing where he developed this split finger, and then he developed some injury based on throwing the split finger. Not necessarily that like the split finger caused it, but he was having to sort of alter his mechanics to make the split finger work. But he assured me that in the off season he would find a way to be able to throw the split finger and the slider and the four seam well. If he does that, he's got 3 above average pitches with stuff. He's not that bad command wise, and so I think he's definitely in the first seat for the closer position there. I didn't really like any of their other relievers, so it's pretty easy for me to put Trevor May in the first seat.
Which is nice, because some of the lower end reliever darts are, not good.
There's more crowded situations for a lot of them. This one, at least, I feel like Trevor May or maybe Shintaro Fujinami. But I also think that they, with the deal they signed him to and the way it works, what they need, I think a standout starter. They did collect a lot of arms, but a lot of those guys have options, and a standout starter would be more valuable to them. So I do think they'll start the season start at least the spring training with him, trying to make him a starter.
Yeah, max out the value, attempt that first, then adjust later as needed. Andrew McCutchen is back in Pittsburgh. Kind of nice to see that, when a long-time player for a franchise, a modern face of the franchise for sure, gets to probably finish his career back where it started. This is a little strange only because I really want to see what Miguel Andujar can do with regular playing time. I know he's just been buried for the last few years with the Yankees after that pretty intriguing debut. 2018, 5 years ago now. It's been a little while. And because of Ji-Man Choi and Carlos Santana, and one of those guys likely having to DH, it's already a little crowded because Andujar is not a great defender. So if you assume Andrew McCutchen's going to play left field, this is pretty bad news for him. But McCutchen, if he's going to be an everyday player in this lineup, might actually be sneaky useful in deep leagues again. I thought he was somewhat productive working mostly as a DH for the Brewers last year.
Yeah, he's still retained his plate discipline, his ability to make contact. The power is down a little bit, but if he does play often, I think you could hit 230 with 12 to 15 homers pretty easily. Andujar, Carlos Santana, Ji-Man Choi. But Carlos Santana, Ji-Man Choi can also play first. It's getting a little crowded here. I don't know that Andujar is going to get a full shot.
Well, I don't think he is. I think if you were like me and you were hoping for that, that's the little bit of downside with this McCutchen reunion. But I think he could be McCutchen, at least in a 15-team league, might be good enough to have on your roster consistently as your last outfielder, or as your in and out outfielder that you mix and match for a spot, because the counting stats should be there. I don't think they're going to give him more than a day off per week. I think he's actually kind of part of their regular plan for how this season's going to begin. Yeah,
I think that they want to show some progress and bank some wins and start this thing going in the right direction. To defend them, I think Brian Hayes, O'Neill Cruz, and Rodolfo Castro are 3 players I'm excited about. If they can convince Brian Reynolds to stay, they've got Henry Davis coming at catcher. That starts to be a team that looks pretty solid up the middle. And these kind of little moves that they're making at first base and DH and the corner outfield start to become more important if you really believe what they're doing up the middle. I think Rodolfo Castro could stop switch hitting. I think that might be an interesting idea for him in the Cedric Mullins cast. He's been pretty bad. I think it's from the right side. Let me I can get this right, but career splits from the left side, 71 WRC plus from the left side, and a 143 WRC plus from the right side.
Yeah, just take everything from the right side, face same-handed pitching from the right side, and see what happens.
Numbers wise, what you'd expect is, like a 10% split or whatever split you'd expect. What you're trying to do by being a switch hitter is always have the platoon advantage. But if he's so much better, if you think he's a true talent 130 WRC plus player from the right side, then you can take the platoon advantage away against righties and still be better than that, than 71 WRC plus. So that's the question. And it's not like, oh, he just had really poor luck. Like, he had a 31% strikeout rate versus righties as a lefty. He has a 19% strikeout rate versus lefties as a righty. So there's real fundamental differences under the hood there, where you're just like, maybe it's not going to work out. Maybe you should talk to Cedric Mullins. But in any case, I do like him in terms of the way I think he's got a lot of batted ball oomph, got some power. I think he could strike out a little bit less in the future. I like his body, like in terms of he's like a short, compact fire plug kind of player. I like what I see when I watch him play. Like, he's energetic, and I know the phone fell out of his pocket, so sometimes maybe the concentration isn't 100% there, but he's also young. And so if that concentration comes together with the athleticism he shows in his body, I think there is another layer for him. And if he does take a step forward and Cruz takes that step forward, now you got an infield, so there's something going on here. Kutch could also be an interesting elder statesman for some of those players. I don't know if it needs to be just black players, but there are enough black American players that may sort of blossom under his tutelage. Cal Mitchell is there, Brian Hayes. There's some guys that could take another step, and maybe McCutchen understands something that is unique about the experience of a black American player in America, trying to make that leap. And so maybe his tutelage will be useful there. But just being a solid hitter in that lineup, I think will be good. They need that in some of those spots.
Yep, they'll end up in a prominent spot in the order because of it. You mentioned strikeouts, and I figured, well, let's talk about Jorge Alfaro. He goes to the Red Sox, and even with his flaws, as we've seen, he hits the ball very hard. All right, he strikes out a lot, but he hits the ball hard. Behind the plate, he has at times shown good defensive ability. It's a little up and down, but overall, like, this is one of the best spots he could have landed in Boston, where Reese McGuire and Connor Wong were the two catchers in the depth chart. Even with his flaws, the Bat X has Jorge Alfaro as the best offensive catching option of that trio. So there's a chance he ends up with another pretty clear path to at least 300 plate appearances, but maybe even a larger share than that, depending on the performances of McGuire and Wong and any sort of pressure those guys could possibly put on Alfaro.
Yeah, Wong has an option as well. So it may end up being McGuire and Alfaro to begin the season. I think they're looking to see if any of them could be useful beyond. I guess that is an interesting thing to say, because if this team just decides, oh man, we, with the Story thing and, we're in trouble. Are they going to go into the season being like, this is a year to figure things out? Or are they going to go in the year being like, no, we're going to try and field the best team we can and win this year? Because that would be the kind of decision-making process that I would think about when I was thinking about Alfaro versus Wong.
Yeah, I think they see themselves as at least a wild card threat. And if
they signed Justin Turner,
they signed Turner, they signed Yoshida. Like, Yoshida's got a pretty nice projection from the Bat X for just to throw that out there too. Cassis could be an impact guy at first. The Story injury stinks. They re-signed Devers. That's huge. I don't think a massive cash outlay has ever been forgotten as quickly as the Devers extension at Story News following it. Like whatever credit you deserve as an organization for extending a franchise player,
that went away so quickly.
The shelf life on that should be more than 12 hours. And sorry, it's just really bad timing.
And I thought the shelf life on the Tatis extension was bad.
Yeah. So I think part of it with the Red Sox was they had an expectation that Story was going to just stay healthy and be the guy that they signed, which I didn't think was outlandish at all. They basically replaced JD with Justin Turner, like we talked about a few weeks ago.
A lot cheaper, I guess.
They added Yoshida at a level that many people didn't expect them to. So he's going to be really important to them. They have to be right about that. A healthy Chris Sale is a big part of this team getting better. Is it unreasonable to think that Chris Sale could be a sub 350 ERA pitcher again with over a strikeout per inning as a legitimate number one starter, like a top 15, top 20 starter league wide? I don't think that's ridiculous. So, if you have healthy Sale, you get something from Cassis. The Story injury still hurts, but you've got enough at a few spots to at least hang around. Their problem is the AL East. Yeah, you see the teams in division a little less. That's a tough division. We talked about that in the 3-0 show. They could be the worst team in the division as it stands today. That's possible. And I think all three of us, you and me and Katie Wu, all three of us were on the side that the Red Sox are more likely, as they're currently constructed, to be bottom two in the AL East as opposed to top three.
Like Nick Pavetta's never taken a step forward. Corey Kluber is good when he's in, but he could totally fall apart.
Those are 4 or 5 guys. They're back end starters.
Yeah, but for them, I just named the top, like on the depth chart of Fangraphs, their first and second starters.
They need a lot. They need Brian Bayo to take a step forward.
James Paxton,
better than those guys.
And then next guy is Garrett Whitlock, who was a reliever for them. So
I think their bullpen's a little better, but the Jansen addition, Chris Martin being there, Schreiber's a holdover. That's a nice trio at least. Like the A bullpen in Boston's pretty good. But yeah,
maybe batters 3 through 5 in the lineup are decent.
Yeah, and they probably have to sign Elvis Andrus. Like that's almost like a necessary. It's not where you really want to be in the middle of January. You must sign Elvis Andrus to give yourself a chance to stay afloat.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not even that excited about Christian Arroyo, even though there's like some clear opportunity here. I know he's made good contact, but the barrel rates have never really gotten anywhere. So I feel like he's your classic, Miguel Rojas almost. I guess he's the projections say he's going to be a little better. I can't figure out why though. More contact, no. More power, maybe. Anyway, he looks like a classic 269.9 guy.
So if we want to use Oregon Trail for an analogy, the Red Sox are fording the river, and everyone should always cock the wagon and float. They're trying to ford it. They're trying to walk right through it. Sometimes that works, but when that doesn't work, it gets sideways. It is a disaster when you ford the river and the river is deeper than you expect. I think that's the sort of
start losing horses, losing axles.
All that buffalo meat you gathered, gone, down, just floating away.
Floating away.
You shot 1,800 pounds of meat, but can only carry 40 pounds back to camp. It's like, what are you doing? Not sure which team that is, but
right. Is that the Rangers?
Yeah,
with all the money they spent.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's like, oh, and you can only take all this back. You still only got a little bit better, even though you spent all this money. But
yeah.
One other quick one. Luke Weaver to the Reds. Is anything there? Is it reliever time for Luke Weaver?
It could be. The changeup has been good and has stayed good, and he's tried to add pitch after pitch to it. I really think Michael Wacha is the cop here because Michael Wacha always had the changeup. Weaver has the changeup. Wacha tried to add the cutter. Weaver tried to add the cutter. The cutter and slider has never been good for Wacha. Has never been really that good for Weaver. But there's a little faint ability here that the fastball stuff plus 89 is actually not that bad compared to some starters, especially back end starters. The changeup is a legitimate thing, and the slider had a 97 stuff plus, which is actually kind of low for a slider, but there could be a 3-pitch mix there. And he locates the curveball well, so maybe there's even a 4-pitch mix there. So I can see how someone's talked their way into it. And I'd be willing to give Luke Weaver a shot myself. But how does that rotation go? Like there's some pretty clear young guys that are definitely going to get as much burn as they want, I think, in Green and Lodolo, as long as they're healthy. I think that Weaver might be the 6th starter because I think Sessa is a starter, and they traded for him to be a starter. And then there's Graham Ashcraft. So now we've got Ashcraft, Lodolo, Green, and Sessa. That's 4. The 5th one goes down to Weaver and Dunn, and then some interesting guys in their own, like Brandon Williamson, Connor Overton. Maybe Weaver's the 5th starter.
Yeah, I think Justin he's in the mix for. This is great.
Some health issues, and
I think Weaver is one of at least 3 candidates for the 5th starter role. He's in a spot where he can win it. It's not a park where you like to stream all that much because home run issues can really be problematic there.
I like him better than Dunn.
He probably makes the roster in some capacity. I don't think he's a cut at the end of spring training. He doesn't make the rotation. I think they give him a shot as a reliever.
Yeah. And he looks a little bit better suited to be a reliever than Justin Dunn, who has real command issues.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's just not working out so far for Justin Dunn. Last news item for today. Chris Paddack signed an extension with the Twins as he continues to work his way back from Tommy John surgery, and a little bit of a forgotten guy, I think, because he got hurt pretty early last season. But what is your kind of longer-term outlook on Chris Paddack based on what we've seen up to this point in his career, now coming off Tommy John surgery? Once he's healthy enough to pitch again, where should we set our expectations for him?
I mean, his projections is like a 4 ERA from Steamer and below average strikeout rate. I don't know. He has plus command, and there's always this slight possibility that the curve or the slider becomes a legit 3rd pitch, and then he can strike more guys out and not be so changeup reliant in terms of getting his strikeouts, because the changeup is not as good as breaking balls at getting whiffs. And that's why he hasn't had the high strikeout rates. So I'm waiting for him to get a breaking ball, and I'm excited to see what he could do with a breaking ball. And so I think he's a 4 ERA guy with upside.
Yeah, I think that's a fair sort of expectation at this point for Chris Paddack. He reminds me a little bit of Brandon Beachy, Atlanta pitcher from early part of the last decade.
Yeah,
Tommy Johns, and it just never quite came back for him. Looked really, really promising at the start of his career. I hope it's a better, longer-term outcome. But that second Tommy John, that's still still
really
pretty
good
dicey.
Changeup and some issues kind of getting that those breaking balls to match the quality of the changeup.
Man, Brandon Beachy is only 36. He's still at an age where Brandon Beachy could have a random comeback.
As a reliever.
Yeah, he hasn't pitched.
Signed a minor league contract with the Giants in 2019.
Yeah, probably done. That's
the last news item.
But
yeah, well, hopefully it turns out a little bit better than Vichi's health outcomes for sure.
Yeah, hoping for that as Paddack continues to go through those stages. It's more of a dynasty keeper league sort of lean, of course, for trying to stash him away. It's got to be a really deep league, though, if you want to use a roster spot on Chris Paddack at this point. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. As we may have mentioned earlier, draft and hold season is alive and well, so we'll have more observations from those drafts. I got one that just started.
Auto-drafted Edwin Diaz in the second. I'm so sorry. Anybody who's listening in that league, I did not mean to do that. I had a lot of things on my plate that day. It basically decided my future employment situation, and a lot of things were going on that day. So contracts were signed and things went down, and I ended up with Edwin Diaz. I thought I would hate it, but it really opened me up to not do anything about relievers for the next 10 rounds. And so right now, Diaz, Woodruff, Glasnow are my top 3 pitchers, and Tucker, Albies, Bregman are my top 3 hitters. After 6 rounds, ended up with Tim Anderson, Sean Murphy, and Rhys Hoskins. After that, I think we'll hear about this league as we're recording podcast, but I don't hate it as much as I thought after picking Edwin Diaz in the second, which I would never do. The other thing is, if you're setting KDS and you're about to do it, don't take the top 4 picks. I would say even the top 5 picks, maybe even top 6. Set your KDS to favor 7 through 15.
Interesting. Well, I think we'll get more into the KDS details very soon. I've got one, a draft and hold that just started. The first one I had number 1. This one, I had picked 15, which was second in my KDS order. And the reason it was second is not because I think it's the second best position overall. It's because I hate being on the clock any more than I have to be, because I am a menace to myself, constantly checking.
Oh my God.
I drive
everybody being in the middle
crazy.
Has been awful. I feel like I'm always like, can't make your pick. I want to go.
Yep. It's a little easier to check out and then check back in. And since you're making the 2 picks consecutively, you can sort of, I don't know, build faster. Everyone else gets 1 brick at a time. You get 2. So I think it's an advantage. I know our friend Ariel Cohen is convinced that it's the opposite. Someday we will come to a resolution on that one. But if you got questions for a future episode, send those our way. Rates and Barrels at theathletic.com. You can drop us a tweet. Eno is at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.